Master Dennis Sorry about that. This is National Master Dennis Monokroussos welcoming you to another one of our USCL Game of the Year Countdown shows. And tonight I'm going to recap the games from weeks 12 through 10, or 10 through 12, depending on how you want to look at it. In other words, the 10th through 12th place finishers in the countdown. So first we're going to take a look at some excerpts from the 12th place finishing game between Dmitry Zilberstein of the San Francisco team, I believe, against John Bartholomew from Dallas. And Dallas, of course, was the team that ended up winning the national championship, won the league competition. But in this game, Zilberstein, I'm not sure which it is, with white managed to win. So here we go. We're going to take, again, a quick look at this game and mostly focus on some high points in each of the three games. Alright, so we've got a Caro-Kann advanced variation, and here Bartholomew played not the usual move, which is bishop to f5. This is the most common move, and probably the most important move, but c5, which he played, is also a very significant variation. I believe it was recommended by Jovanka Huska in her recent repertoire book on the Caro-Kann. Vladimir Kramnik played it once against Alexei Shirov in a game, and he actually won that game too. So it's certainly an important move, and one that players who play the advance with white absolutely need to know about. Okay, so d takes c5, and here knight c6 is possible. I believe Huska calls this adventurous, or she has some amusing adjective about this that suggests that it's very risky. So Bartholomew played e6, which is what she in fact recommends, and now we essentially have a kind of French defense. So it's a line of the French that isn't considered to be especially dangerous for black, but of course white has an extra tempo compared to that variation. Now normally white plays it really here with bishop to e3, holds on to the pawn, and in that way starts to try to exploit the extra tempo. Okay, but Zilberstein played very casually here, just natural moves, without seemingly striving for a great deal of accuracy. Alright, so knight f3, bishop c5, bishop d3, and we have a few developing moves. And okay, in this position, after b4, black played bishop to e7. And I have to say that I don't especially like this move. And the reason why I don't, well, we'll see in a few moves. So let's just go on here, and we'll come back. Alright, and this looks kind of inharmonious as well. So my impression about this position here, and we'll even make a couple more moves. So c4, takes and takes. It really looks like a kind of a critical position for black, and he's really quite cramped. I mean, ideally he'd like to just pick his queen up, move it someplace, then play rook f to d8, put the other rook on c8. But, okay, if the queen's on b6, it's a little exposed there. Now notice that black can play queen to b6, because queen takes d7. Go ahead and show you this. Queen to b6, takes, white's out of queen. So this is, it's playable from that standpoint, but just taking it on its own right, it's not really very well placed. I mean, white could play maybe knight c3 and knight to a4, among other things, demonstrating that the queen really isn't so secure on that spot. Alright, but the point is, okay, we want the queen kind of out of the way. If it goes to c7, well, that's what happens in the game, and that's not really a permanent location either, because it could be vulnerable on the c file. So what would make more sense? Well, the bishop should be on b6. Then we'd like to put maybe the knight from c6 somewhere else. We'd like to ideally have the bishop on c6. So let's move these guys around. So this would go here, this should be here, the knight should be on d5, something like that. And then maybe black's queen goes to e7, and the rooks go to d8 and c8. Okay, so here I think black's position would be much more logical and more harmonious as well. So going back, I would say that instead of bishop to e7, bishop to b6 would be a much more sensible try here. And now we could have some kind of continuation like knight e7, bishop d6, d7 and c6, and then just develop normally from there. Might be one way. Another possibility might be, well, no, we'll stick with that. So that's a possible idea. And black could also then consider playing a6, and instead of putting the bishop on c6, putting it on b5, trying to swap it off. So I think this would have been a better plan. Alright, so let's go back to the position that happened in the game. Black played queen to c7, knight here, rook here, queen here. And now this position kind of seems suspicious to me, really. I mean, black's pieces are quite passive. I mean, he does have the rook on c8 is fine, and he does have a little bit of pressure against white's pawn on e5. But that aside, I mean, he just has less space. They don't coordinate. His pieces don't coordinate especially well. Well, I should say the bishops are quite poor. So the rest of the pieces are pretty sensible, especially, you know, and the rook, once the rook goes to d8, then that piece will be working quite well also. But black's bishops are really pretty feebly placed at the moment. So given that white has this extra space and a particular pawn on e5, the natural way for white to proceed would be to start shuffling pieces over to the king side. And he in fact does this. He goes on this little queen jaunt with queen e2, then queen e4, queen g4. But as it turns out, after b5 and then a5, it seems that black actually now has reasonable counterplay. So now the bishop on e7 actually does make sense, and the only piece that's a little bit of an underachiever is the bishop on d7. But really everything else is functioning quite well at this point. So let me go back here and take a look at some of the analysis that I came up with. Mostly mine. I computer checked it at the end, but it's primarily my ideas here. And again, all kind of revolving around the idea that black's king side is fairly bare. I mean, he's got these pieces over here not really helping with the defense of the king side, and quite far away as well. And not only that, but it's hard for them to progress over the king side. So, in principle, I like Silverstein's idea of bringing the queen to g4 before playing h4, h5, but perhaps we can make things move more quickly. So let's take a look, first of all, at the direct h4. Alright, and we'll consider three moves for black, both captures, and maybe playing h6 to prevent white from playing h5 and then h6 himself. Okay, so knight takes h4. Let's take a look at this. So takes, and now probably the best thing for white to do is to play knight to e4. And I would simply say that he has a clear advantage in the position here. This piece is all ready to fly over to the king side, so he can continue with moves like, queen to h5. In some cases, knight to f6. This rook can come from c3 over to h3 or to g3. The bishop drops back to d3, and you can see it's quite a powerful attacking array that white can muster here. Notice, though, that white with knight 3, again it fails. 7, queen 6, and there's a rook f to d8. Now, the queen attack is unclear, so not bad exactly, but it's kind of changing the tactic, I'd say. So it's much better just to play knight to e4, not grab the bishop, and just build up for the attack. Alright, so knight takes h4 I think is not an especially appealing way for black to proceed here. Okay, if he tries h6, alright, then h5, knight f4, and here rook to e4 is good, but I think we'll make knight to e4 our main move. Again, we're kind of quasi-threatening the bishop on d7. There's always rook f to d8 in reply. But let's say black makes the natural move and defends it. Well, now knight to f6 check looks quite interesting. If black ignores this gift, well, of course, we just take. And while he regained the one piece, he's losing the knight on h5, so this is no good for him. So after knight to f6 check, black should grab the knight, e takes, and now knight to e5. So we're threatening simply queen to g4 with a quick mate. And even though we can return the piece and block, it's still not very good. So here, and white's attack is going to be decisive. Just to give one very quick variation, say he plays king to h8. Now we're threatening queen h6 mate as well as the bishop. Now simply bishop to d3, and there's no good defense to the threat. In fact, it's probably just forcing mate in a very few moves, because queen f5, even if we give up the queen, bishop takes, then queen h6 mate again. Okay, so going back to the position after h4, looks like neither knight takes h4 nor h6 is very good for black. Bishop takes h4, I would say, is well, it clearly is a third reasonable possibility. Let's see how this one works. So again, just take, knight e4, hitting the bishop on d7, and again adding the possible ideas of putting the knight on d6, which would be kind of a positional squeeze approach. But there's also knight f6 check possibilities, and in some cases the knight goes to g5 as well. All this for a pawn, and you notice that white's queen is going to come to g4 or h5 in a single shot. So we don't need to go queen to e2, to e4, to g4, and then maybe to h5 from there. You just give up one pawn, and not an especially significant pawn with respect to the immediate action, and you economize several tempi. So I think this would have been a far better way for white to have played the position. Okay, just to continue a little bit, rook c to d8, queen h5, and now black, of course, can choose between the two knight retreats to g6 and to f5. If he goes to f5, rook c to d1, looks like a good move. And now if black tries to take this pawn here, he simply loses right away to knight to g5, so threatening the mate and discovering an attack on the queen. So h6, g4, knight back, and now this knight check is again decisive. If the king goes over, then knight takes d7, just wins gobs of material, ends up being a full rook. And if g takes f6, e takes f6. Okay, so now we're threatening not just the knight, but queen h6 followed by queen g7 mate. So queen f4 is pretty much forced. We can take this. Now rook to d4. And after the forced queen at g5, can just swap, play rook e to d1. And actually black can just survive this, so this is kind of remarkable. So my initial analysis, I just stopped here and thought, okay, this is just the end, but, or maybe I saw this, I thought, okay, e takes d5, rook takes d5, and white just wins. But in fact, black has bishop to a4. So this annoying little move lets him kick around for a bit. So here, and ultimately this ending is better for white, but it's black can. I wouldn't say that black is losing, or that even that black should lose. But white can try and certainly has good winning chances. Okay, so it looks like black can maybe survive by a hair there, although I suspect that white can improve and probably win. The other possible retreat is knight to g6. Then here, and then the point is to play knight takes f7, and this is crushing. So just to zip through one line with some nice sacrifices. And here, okay, so we make some more progress. And now, alright, we just need to get another piece into play here. So the queen and the knight almost have a mate, but it's not enough. We need someone else. And so the solution is rook to c4. So a very nice move. Actually, I should have made that a quiz for you, so I apologize for not thinking about that in time. And anyway, the point of this is to simply play rook h4 and rook to h8, and black has no good defense. And we have this little check, and there's a mate. Okay, so all of this just goes to show that h4 is very, very promising back in this original position, and it should be promising. Black's pieces are very much out of play, and so if white can just open some lines for his pieces to get to the king side quickly, and at only the cost of a pawn, he should by all means do so. Okay, a second approach is to play knight to e4. So this time we don't sack the pawn, but again we centralize the knight, and this looks quite good for white as well. And maybe depending on that one variation that ended up with the two bishops against the rook, maybe this is better, assuming that white had no improvements in the other line. Okay, so knight to e4. First of all, notice that black cannot capture on d5 because we just take everything, and then we take on d7. And now there's no trap because the bishop's hanging for one thing on e7, and also the queen can retreat to a4. Okay, so black has to put some rook or other on the d file, and white just gets a nice advantage by normal means. So, for example, rook f to d8, knight to d6 takes, and white just has a clear advantage. So he's got a very nice bishop pair. The black queen is shut out of play, and white can again continue to make progress over on the king side as well. Okay, so that's what I would suggest. In the game, Zilberstein played queen to e2, and as I mentioned, we came to this position where black now has actually managed to achieve pretty good counterplay. So white's queenside is collapsing, and he decided the best way to postpone things was with BA, bringing black's knight further offside as well, and now h4. Okay, well here black should probably play bishop to c6, with the idea, well, first of all, he's uncovering an attack on the bishop on d3. In some lines, he may swap off the knight on f3, but just in general, he's grabbing more space, and he's open in the center, which is, again, the well-known best antidote to an attack on the flank. So when one player attacks over on the side of the board, very often, of course not always, but often, opening up the board and getting counterplay in the center is a way of distracting your opponent from continuing his attack. And also, the more space you've got, you have chances of encircling your opponent. So you can kind of not just defend from in front of your king, but kind of go around the side and get the attacker's pieces from with kind of a pincher's movement. Okay, yeah. All right, sorry. Okay, anyway, in the game, black played knight to c4, and this is kind of logical too. So he's threatening to swap off some pieces. He's centralizing the piece that was out of play. So this is also a good move. Okay, white played bishop takes c4, and this I'm sure is a move that he didn't enjoy playing at all. The bishop was pointing at h7 after a move like h5, and so to swap off this very nice attacking bishop, I think shows pretty clearly that white has done something wrong. B takes c4, and okay, black isn't threatening c3 just yet, but there are positions where he will be, and he's also threatening to take the bishop. So this is here as a possibility. This pawn on a3 can be weak. c3 might happen in some variations. So black is doing quite well here. All right, white played rook to b1, and now perhaps I don't know if it's an inaccuracy, but probably queen to a8 would have been a little bit better than queen to a7, which is what Bartholomew played. All right. So the point of this, or one point of this, is that white doesn't play bishop to d4 with tempo. Secondly, black might continue with bishop to c6 in some cases and try to exert some pressure on the long diagonal. All right, if white plays knight to e4, then c3. Of course, black is also threatening c3. Takes bishop c6, h5, and in this variation, for example, material is equal, but black is probably a little bit better here. So the attack is more or less stopped. I mean, he does have to keep an eye out on h-file possibilities, but it's kind of hard for white to actually double on the h-file. Also, of course, the a3 pawn is weak and probably a goner, but still, black doesn't have tremendous winning chances. I mean, all the pawns are on one side after that, and his extra pawn is a doubled pawn. But okay, black should be fairly safe at this point. All right, so in the game, instead he played queen to a7. Again, c3 is threatened, but white was able to avoid this threat with the gain of time. Cost him a pawn, but it's a pawn he would have lost anyway. Okay, so now h5. Now here, I think black maybe missed another good possibility with c3. Okay, so c3. Let's say we have this exchange here. Of course, it's not an even exchange. White's up a piece now for two pawns, but after these moves, black actually seems to be doing pretty well here. You know, it looks pretty scary. I mean, it looks like white should just be able to give up the exchange, put a knight on g5, play queen to h4, and give mate. But as long as the bishop on d4 can't participate, there shouldn't be any mate. Just to draw some arrows here. So let's say white makes these moves. You know, the point is that this is a little bit of a dead end. So as long as white can't play bishop to c5, then black should live. So it'll be dangerous, and he's got to be careful. But it's not just an automatic winning approach for white. That's all. But it is a very unclear position. All right. Well, instead of c3, black played knight to f8, and now after knight to e4, white is definitely back on top. So now white's pieces are coordinated again. Black's aren't, and you know, after all the excitement and all the chances for play he had, kind of ironically, it turns out that we have a position much like the one we looked at quite a while ago when I was investigating the alternatives for white. to the queen e2, e4, g4 maneuver. So once again, black's rooks are a little bit, they're okay, but they're not great. The bishops on d7 and e7 have, from being involved in variations where they were active and doing useful things to, again, being kind of clumsy. White, after all of this time, now once again does have this idea of knight to f6 check, which is a problem, and the queen is still out of play, black's queen. Alright, so he played bishop to c6, knight f6 check, and now black is in serious trouble. He probably should have played bishop takes f6, as unappealing as that looks, because after king to h8, knight to g5, now everything is just falling apart. The threat, of course, is knight takes f7 mate, and captures on f6 don't help at all. So bishop to e8 is best, but now knight e8, threatening again knight takes f7. So bishop takes g5, knight to d6, and now black is just lost. All right, so we're threatening to take on c8, we're threatening to take on g5, we're threatening to take on f7, and black has just nothing by way of compensation for all of this. So he sacked the exchange and then played bishop to f6, which is yet another mistake. But white's play the rest of the way is quite nice. So he plays h6, threatening, of course, to take on g7. Knight g6, takes. And, alright, well, black has managed to take care of immediate threats to the g7 square. That pawn on h6 is still very, very useful for white, because it means that black is going to have permanent back rank problems to go along with his other pleasures. And in fact, white now takes advantage of that. Hopefully you can see how, in just a matter of milliseconds. Alright, so the answer is queen takes c4. And of course, we can't play rook takes c4, because rook to b8, followed by rook takes f8, checkmate. So black had to play the rook over somewhere else and played rook to g8. Now queen to b4. And the rest is just simple, and I'll kind of go through this quickly. So black managed to get rid of the pawn, but now white is about to promote. Okay, so again threatening rook to c8. Again threatening rook to c8. And so now it just means that white has to prepare it. But here we go again. So rook to c8 is again threatened. Black stops it. And one more time. And this time, black is out of defenders. So rook to c8 is now finally going to happen. And this is going to cost black even more material. So just a couple more moves here. Rook to b8. And again, okay, this is another nice moment to see what white's play should do. Of course, there's nothing that's bad here except for maybe something like queen to c6 or queen to d5. But what's the best and most rapid and efficient way to end black's resistance? Alright, the answer is this. Queen takes b8, and then rook to c8. And here, black resigned. So white's going to make a new queen, and we'll end up a rook ahead at least. So, very nice concluding portion of the game by Zilberstein. And really, I mean, I don't think he played a poor game. It's just that I think his initial attacking idea with the queen maneuver was rather slow. And black, I think, did have an advantage as a result. But white's general opening play was okay, and after black lost the initiative, I think white concluded in nice fashion as well. Okay, so that was our number 12 game. Let's move on to number 11. So this is between Mackenzie Molnar and Larry Kaufman. Molnar plays for the New Jersey team, whilst Kaufman, who is an IM, the father of a player who's about to become an IM, and also the opening book writer for the Ribka program, plays for Baltimore and had black. Alright, so here we go. French defense. And here Kaufman played kind of an unusual line. I'm not even sure what this is called. So when it's knight to d2 on move 3, when black plays knight to c6, it's called the Guimard French. But I don't know what name this thing has, if any. Alright, so knight to f3, knight f6, bishop g5, bishop e7. E5 is played here too, but bishop takes f6 is quite common and scores very well. Bishop f6, bishop to b5, castles, queen d2, knight to b8. Okay, so this all looks quite peculiar, but apparently this is actually how this variation typically continues, at least to the extent that there is a typical continuation within this line. Alright, white castles long, black plays b6, king b1, bishop to b7, and somewhere around here it just looks like black is playing a little bit too leisurely. I mean, maybe, I don't know, I'm really not sure what there doesn't seem to be a usual recipe. I would suppose at some point maybe black should consider playing d takes e4, because in the game, after c5, e5, bishop to e7, it looks like black has good pressure, but in fact, he's just in danger of getting blitzkrieged off the board here. I mean, white's going to play an attack involving h4, the bishop coming back to d3, and then threatening the classic Greek gift sacrifice. Also, even if that doesn't happen, after h4, the pawn could continue to go up the board. There's also the idea of rook h3, g3. So white has an awful lot of attacking ideas, while black's counterplay looks a bit slow. Okay, and to give himself a little bit more time, white surrenders the center with d takes c5. So b takes c5, h4, and the point is that when he does play bishop to d3, he won't have to worry about c4, because he can simply go back a step and play bishop takes c4, exploiting the pin on the d file. So it's with this in mind that black plays queen to b6. So now there is no worry about this bishop takes c4 trick. Additionally, of course, the b file is half open, and black would like to get counterplay against white's king. Alright, and a further point too is that black may consider d4, and if the knight moves, then the bishop would hang. So there's that as well. So bishop to d3, and now though, you have to see if c4 is really playable or not. And actually, let me invite you guys to try to figure that out. So this would be a good place to stop the recording and analyze if after c4, white can successfully play the stereotyped bishop takes h7 sack or not. So it doesn't always work. Okay, so hopefully you've checked it out, and the answer is that in this case it does work. So takes, knight to g5 check. King to h6 is no good because of knight e6. King to g6 just walks into h5 checks. That's no good. So here, king to g8 is the standard try here, or would be the appropriate try. Queen to g4, so heading for h5. And it doesn't seem that black has any really suitable defense to the basic threat of queen h5, queen h7, queen h8. So for example, if he tries this and then rook to d8, with the idea that if white plays queen to h5, black runs off with king to f8, white throws in first the move g6. And now black is just in big trouble. So you can work out the variations for yourself here, but if you're just curious about the appropriate evaluation, it's that white is winning. Alright, so after bishop to d3, black cannot play c4, and so he played instead the move h6. Okay, well now Molnar chose the other idea that I had mentioned in conjunction with h4, and that's rook to h3. Preparing rook to h3 with threats, for example, to capture on h6. But he has some other nice ideas too, as we'll see. Okay, well now if black plays c4, again this looks pretty natural. Trying to kick it back, and also clearing a path for the bishop to come to a3. It turns out that white's attack is actually surprisingly rapid and powerful. So rook to g3, and just to give one possibility, I mean king to h8 should be examined as well. But let's suppose that black takes. Let's see what happens. Alright, so c takes d3, queen h6, of course g6 is threatened, and now rook takes g6 shouldn't lead to more than a perpetual check. Actually, you know, I should maybe investigate this a little bit. Takes here. Okay, and now knight to g5. And now let's see if I'm just talking nonsense. So the problem for white is d takes c2 check. And of course he can't allow himself to lose his rook, then he's not going to have anything to mate with on the h file after bishop takes g5, h takes g5. If king takes g2, Well, now among other things, black can simply play queen takes f2 check, and then queen to f5, stopping the mate and just winning the game. So I think white would have to play queen takes c2, but this gives up some ground over on the king side. And now perhaps, if nothing else, black could play rook to f5. And I don't believe that white has any real winning prospects here. So maybe it's still a draw. Maybe you guys will figure something out, and perhaps I'm just completely mistaken, but I think black should be able to hold here. But, alright, I mean, g4, maybe it's not entirely clear. So, for example, if this, king g7, rook h1. Alright, maybe good things are happening here for white. So, have to think about this a bit. Okay, another idea is just to play... Oh, we're up a piece too, so this is all silly. Okay, so just queen takes f2. So I was thinking it was just the rook, but it's a piece as well, so this is completely hopeless for white. Alright, so rook takes g6 is no good. I mean, it's good for perpetual, that's it. Trying to win will not succeed. However, knight to g5 I think does win. Alright, so this time, after d takes c2, black gets quite a few checks, but at the end of the day, they run out, and then white is going to win with this attack. So, do this, a little bit of fancy stepping here, and now the king goes over in the corner, and finally, black has to capture the knight. Now, it may still look as if black is okay. So queen takes e5, rook h3, queen g7. So here's another place where you could ask yourself, did I miss something for white? Or does white have something good that he can do in that position? So we'll just go back to, I don't know, let's say here, and see if you can figure out how white can win this, if he can. Okay, so this is a little bit complicated, but not too bad. So I think if you were industrious, I think you'll have had a good chance of solving the position. So rook to h3 was indeed the right move, queen to g7, and now rook d to h1. And the threat is to play queen to h8 check, followed by takes, rook takes, and then the second rook comes up to h7 with checkmate. Okay, so black can take, and now play f5 though. And this might have seemed like a way out for black, but in fact white regains the material with a decisive attack. So he could play rook to h8 check, and then bring a rook to h7, and then swipe the bishop on b7. And that's probably pretty good. But notice that black does have a lot of pawns. So we do want to make sure the attack is as powerful as possible. And in fact, the best move for white here is the subtle knight to b5. So the idea is to play, of course, knight to d6, and then the two rook checkmate will again work. Or rook takes g6 for that matter. So it could be rook h8 and rook h7, or rook g6 both. So black's king needs to leave town right away. And here white's getting to make a few free moves. Okay, so if king c8, rook c1 is lethal. Well, after king to e8, rook to e1 is crushing. So white does win, going all the way back here after c4. So it's a very, very long continuation. It's an 18-move variation there, but it's pretty much forced. I mean, almost every move is forced, at least after c takes d3. So I suggest maybe king to h8 is possibly a place to look for improvements. Though, yeah, okay, if queen to g4, rook to g8, black's position is very suspicious, but maybe there's some way to hold there. I'm not sure. So I'm thinking about, for example, queen to g4, rook to g8, and then knight to g5, threatening knight takes f7 mate, and black certainly doesn't want to capture. So we'll take a quick look, just for fun. So this, okay, so we're threatening the mate. This is the only sensible defense. And now knight to g5. So we're threatening knight f7 mate, and if c takes d3, just use the queen instead of the bishop to finish the job. Of course, well, I say of course, whoops. If pawn takes, of course this is no good because queen h5 mate. And if bishop takes g5, h takes g5, c takes d3. Alright, and now what? Play this. Okay, I'm still worried about these lines. This is still rather annoying. Alright, well, king c1, okay, so there's no perpetual there. Alright, but after g6, we don't have queen f4, f6, which is what I was hoping for initially. Alright, rook f3, and then maybe queen going into those dark squares. But here, rook f7, that's probably no good because of this. Alright, so I'm kind of speculating here. I'm not really sure what's best. Of course, we can always play rook takes b7, regain the material. Anyway, very interesting play. Probably going back here, this may be some kind of key position at this point. So takes. You know, maybe white could try something like queen f4 to preempt this queen takes f2 business. So I don't know. I mean, this looks like it's interesting and worthy of further analysis. All right. Well, in the game, yeah, there was a game. Black played f5, so he tries to grab some space over there, but Molnar still has things going quite rapidly here with his kingside attack. Rook g3, again threatening queen takes h6, king h8, rook g6, c4, and now Molnar played a very nice move here. He played knight to d4. Unfortunately, he followed it up incorrectly. So knight to d4, c takes d3, and now instead of rook takes d3, which he played, I think simply rook takes h6 is winning. Maybe he thought that this would transpose. The move he chose in the game would transpose to a line we're going to see here, but in fact he missed something. Or at least he missed something if that's what he was thinking. Alright, now if he takes the rook, we just do this, and then rook takes d3. The threat of rook to g3 is fatal, because the king can't escape with king f7 on account of queen h5 check. So the king gets dragged back to the g file and mate in two moves. Okay, so after rook takes h6, black has to ignore the rook and play king to g8. But I think after rook takes d3, white's simply winning. He's got just a lot of threats here. Rook takes e6, knight takes e6, rook to g3, and so on. And black neither has real counterplay nor the possibility of bringing his pieces over to the king side with sufficient speed to cover everything. Okay, so in the game, instead of rook takes h6 check, as I said, he played rook takes d3 first. But this isn't as good, because after rook takes f7, now rook takes h6 is simply no good, because he can play g takes h6, and after queen takes h6, he doesn't have to play king to g8, he can play rook to h7. So black is simply winning after rook takes h6. He could play rook takes e6, though, and here I think he still has a very big edge. So the queen moves, then the rook goes to g3, and maybe the knight takes on f5 in some cases, and white's in terrific shape here. It's not an outright win, but it's a very good position. He played rook d to g3, though, which I think is also not as good. So I think a second straight inaccuracy here. Kaufman played knight to d7, and now rook takes e6 is good, but also Molnar's move is fine. Knight takes e6. And here I think black is now, I'm not sure if he's better, but he's probably approximately equal with best play. So queen to b4 is a possibility. And here I think the position is kind of unclear after knight to d4, bishop c5, rook takes g7, and this is just a very messy position, I think, kind of obviously. So here, black is up rook for a few pawns. 3 pawns, I think? Yeah, 3 pawns. But the bishop on b7 is loose. The pawn on d6 is quite dangerous. And there are also probably pretty decent perpetual check possibilities for white as well. So it's I'm not sure what's going on here. Probably it's better to have black here than white, but it's kind of murky. Okay, well in the game, instead of queen to b4, Kaufman played queen to a6. This is reasonable too, threatening queen to f1 check. And here in the USCL, the initial judging, so when it was game of the week, the judges seem to be really thrilled to death about white's next 2 moves here. And I frankly have no idea why. It seems to me that he was just forced to make moves like this because he's managed to get himself into trouble. So it's not that this is some brilliant attacking idea, but rather his play has been sufficiently inaccurate that now black actually has threats that he has to deal with. So he played knight to d1, taking care of the back rank, and then after queen to e2, he played queen to c1. So again, I don't think this is fantastic at all. I think it's good that he did this. I mean, they're decent moves, but this isn't some brilliancy. I mean, if we want to talk about the brilliant ideas, they were before, and since then white has been going backwards, both literally here with the knight and queen, but also figuratively with the evaluation. Okay, now here I think if black plays bishop to b4, we see that far from being some fantastic idea, this double retreat, it could actually prove to be kind of ridiculous. Bishop to d2 winning the queen is threatened here. So probably the best moves here now for both sides are this. Knight f4, queen to d2, e6, and this looks really strong, but hang on, takes, and now bishop to d6. And so this seems to get black off the hook, and in fact give him an advantage. Alright, so the problem is that there's no convenient way to defend this knight. If white were to play rook to f3, for instance, then there's knight to e5. And if you take, then let's see, actually which way should we take? If we take this way, he takes this one, and yeah, this line is probably good for white. Okay, so we see rook to f3. Probably d4 might be better. Let's see. So d4, take the rook, take this. Not better. And knight to g6 is coming again. Let me think about this one. Okay, rook f3. What's going on here? Oh, okay. Just this move. Just trade this, and then we play rook f6. Alright, that's the simple solution, and black is winning. Okay, so rook f3 doesn't work, and knight to d3, maintaining the fork. We end up with a position where black is up the exchange for a pawn, and a little bit better. So, you know, his pawn isn't fantastic. The bishop on b7 is a little bit blocked, but black could also play d4, and knights aren't the best compensation generally for the exchange either. So this would have left black with the upper hand here. Alright, instead, he played queen takes e5, and he's still okay, but it's getting dangerous. So knight takes g7, and now black had a good move, once again cutting off the queen, f4. So after queen to rook to e6, takes, and f takes g3. Black is probably a little bit better here, though this is of course a very unclear position. So the material is obviously extremely imbalanced, and black's king is a little bit exposed, but on the other hand he's got it's got 2 rooks and a piece for the queen as well, and all the key squares are covered. So this would just be a very messy position, but probably black is a little bit better here, though I wouldn't want to bet much money on that. Actually, I wouldn't bet any money on that, but that's beside the point. Okay, so in the game, Kaufman played rook takes g7, rook g7, and here he had his last chance, though the trend is going against him. So with f4, white's better now, but it's still kind of murky. But after queen takes g7, now it's just all downhill for black. So takes, queen f4, and although black is doing very well on material, the problem is that white's pieces are now extremely active and very well coordinated. So knight to e3, followed by knight takes f5 is coming, can see the threat of queen c7 at the moment too, and black just can't deal with this. I mean, he's got too many pieces that are just loose here, and so white finished very very efficiently. All right, so more exchanges, and again taking advantage of black's loose pieces. And here you have a very funny position where this little set of black pieces is all stuck. The bishop on c7 can't move because the other bishop will hang. The bishop on b7 can move to a6, but that's it. And of course the rook can't move because the bishop on c7 would hang. So white first takes care of the back rank, and also threatens perhaps to play a5 and maybe a6 at some moment. So black plays a5. Now g4, and so while black is stuck in his little box over there, white's going to play the g pawn up the board and then try to give mate. Okay, so black plays d4, which is a good move. It's the only way to try to get a little play. The point is that, okay, if black plays bishop to a6 here, then white can play queen to c6. The bishop goes wherever, let's say to e2, and then queen to e6, and so we have a little fork. While if the bishop goes, let's say to c4 instead, then queen to d7. Oh, sorry, not queen d7, queen to b7, excuse me. And the pieces can't be defended. So that's the point of black playing d4. If this pawn's on d4, he can play bishop to e6 here. So d4, white takes, goes back, and now bishop to a6. So he's trying to wriggle, but it's hopeless. Queen to e6, not allowing the bishop to come back around, so he goes back into his box. Okay, and now this time queen c6. Bishop f1. So notice he's taken all the useful squares to that bishop away, and after queen to b7, bishop to h3 doesn't protect the rook. So here, Kaufman resigned. Alright, so this is a lot like the previous game, where white had some really excellent ideas early in the game, and then kind of lost the thread for a while and let black equalize and maybe even get some small advantage, but then finally black returned the favor and white finished off in style. Okay, so now we turn to our last game. This is from the match between Boston and Philadelphia. Brian Smith had white. I believe he plays for Philadelphia, and Perelstein had black playing for Boston. And alright, so this game is a closed route, which is unusual for Perelstein, who I believe usually plays the accelerated dragon. And indeed in this game, Perelstein made some moves which were kind of unusual. Now this isn't one of them, so this is a very, very common variation called the Breyer variation. I think I've discussed this in the past, but maybe I'm confusing it with one of the chess-based shows. But anyway, the point of this is to bring the knight to d7, the bishop goes to b7, and the pawn goes to c5. And this way, none of black's queenside forces, whether pieces or pawns, is getting in anyone else's way. So it's a very harmonious development, even though it involves some loss of time. Okay, white plays d4, knight b to d7, and all of this has happened literally thousands of times. So black is going to fianchetto the other bishop, and also the pawn on g6 is useful to keep white's knight off of, the f5 square. Okay, so here white played a move that's not the most common, but it's still a very common move. The main moves here are a4 and b3. a4 being the most common, but these are both quite usual moves. And in fact, I think b3 is, or at least for a while, was actually the most common move. And now a4 is kind of taken over, or it's taken back over. So a4 was always the most common move, b3, and there was this idea of playing rook to b1, d5, and c4. And this became extremely popular for a few years. But it seems like black has finally figured out some ways to be okay there. Alright, so Smith played a different move, bishop to g5, and this provokes h6, and now bishop to d2. Okay, so black plays bishop to g7, and this is again still a quite common position. In fact, this position occurred in the first game of the Fischer-Spassky rematch in 1992. Probably one of Fischer's two best games in that match. And that continued, as have many other games. A4, C5, D5, C4. Very, very typical stuff here. I believe this has happened on quite a number of occasions. And okay, here Fischer played B4, which I think was a novelty at the time, and Spassky played rather poorly. I don't remember what he played. Knight to H7, which is a strange move. I mean, the idea is to play for F5, so he wanted to play kind of a King's Indian approach, and this is a normal idea, though it's rather hard to actually achieve that. But the best thing to play first was C takes B3, and this is what everyone besides Spassky in that game has played since then, and what all the commentators, even during the game, had recommended. So takes, and now Knight C5, so that's the point. And White maybe has a very small edge here, but nothing really to write home about. Okay. Instead of that, though, Smith played H4, and this is a bit unusual. Now, it's well motivated. Of course, he wants to play H5, and if Black plays H5, then White will gain control or regain control over the G5 square. Now, Black has, I think, a few things that he can play. So one is to play H5, which he in fact did. But I think he can also play to just go immediately for activity in the center. So he takes, and then C5. White can play H5, and I would just say that this position is really very unclear. So Black can capture on D4 here, and we have kind of a race. So can Black take control over the center, put all his pieces on perfect squares before White can build up something meaningful on the king side. So it's a risky approach, though, and I don't think there's anything wrong with what Perelstein did with H5. Okay, bishop to G5 happened. Here, though, I think Perelstein starts making unusual moves, at least moves that seem to me unusual from my understanding of the closed Rui. So I know, you have to be careful criticizing a strong GM, but nevertheless, and I think this is actually a very, very good rule of thumb, or I don't know if it's a rule of thumb exactly, but anyway, I'll just spit it out. I've noticed both when I'm the victim and as the as victim, as the punisher, and as a spectator, that when a player gets outside of typical positions that he knows, his strength goes way down. So part of what makes Perelstein a grandmaster is that he's able to play a great many positions like a good grandmaster. But there are other positions that he doesn't know as well, and this perhaps is one of them. So here he plays the move C6, and this strikes me as a little bit odd. Not a bad move, I wouldn't say, but a little bit odd. I mean, typically what Black needs to do is to gain counterplay either in the center or on the queen side. And this, I think, doesn't really foster either. So I would say the more forceful approach is to play C5, which gives White the option of locking up the center with D5. And if that happens, then Black plays C4, Knight C5, and so on, with typical queenside counterplay. Of course, White will build up on the king side. This is not news, but Black has lots of defensive resources over there, as has been proved in, again, hundreds of games in this variation and in the closed Rui over the years. Another possibility is even more direct. E takes D4 and then C5. Again, all of Black's pieces really spring to life here, and White gets the central majority, but Black is in, I think, quite good shape. So either of these I would prefer to C6. Okay, so C6, Queen D2, and now another unusual move, I think. He plays Queen to E7, and this is, again, quite atypical. Now, when I look at this, I mean, what I think is that Perelstein was really being guided by Peart's principles. So there are a lot of Peart's defenses that look kind of like this, and if White plays bishop to H6, Black brings the queen to F8 and tries to kind of shore things up, and only slowly but surely advance on the queen side. But I'm not sure that he needs to play the position really that slowly. So, again, it's not really that it's an outright error, but it just seems to be a little unnatural. So I would prefer either queen to C7, avoiding the pin and this kingside play in general, and or even perhaps queen to b6 with an eye towards pressuring white center again with maybe e takes d4 followed by c5. Okay, so in the game he played queen to e7. After knight to h2, played queen to f8. But now white gets in f4, and it just strikes me that black, typically in the Rui, it's hard for white to get this in because there will usually be some way for black to quickly gain possession of the f4 or of the e5 square. So it'll take on f4 and play c5, something like that. But here it looks like white has just about the most favorable version of it that he can usually get. All right, so black played c5, and so white decided, of course, not to give up the e5 square, but to close things up. But he'll have gained something in the meantime. So after fe, de, and then d5, now, we have that locked center, but it's nice for white that this pawn on d5 is passed. Also, white has an open f-file, which he can seek to exploit as well. And alright, so I think this is giving white a little bit of a comfortable position. Okay, and now, once again, Perlstein makes a move that, again, isn't really an error per se, but seems to me a little bit fishy. So he plays knight to h7. So I'm inclined to leave the knight there, and again to try for play on the queen side. So he does kick the bishop back, but I'm not really sure how much he gained out of that. Okay, so now he plays queen to d6, blockading the passer, albeit with the worst blockader. I mean, the best blockader is usually a knight, and a queen or a rook typically the worst, at least when there are minor pieces on the board. Alright, so white continues his build-up, rook to f1, bishop to f6. Maybe this is the idea behind knight to h7, but this too, I think, fails to convince. So again, all of black's pieces, well, most of black's pieces are on at least non-traditional squares, to put it nicely. Okay, so here I think white could play queen to f2, and after rook to f8, then play knight to f3. But alright, probably nothing really wrong with knight to f3 right away. Okay, and now black plays bishop to d8. So kind of unusual. I mean, remember when we were discussing this queen to e7 idea back here? So I was thinking, okay, usually you want the queen on the queen side, but maybe Perlstein was thinking, well, I want to put the queen on e7 and then to f8, so that way my king side isn't so weak. But now, the weird thing is, he plays bishop to d8, and then the idea is to bring the bishop to a5 or to b6. So very unusual. He first is so worried about the king side that he brings the queen over to help, and now everyone leaves the king side. So rather strange to me. Okay, white played b3, not necessarily the best move, but okay. Bishop a5, a4. Alright, so here I think white's making a little bit more progress. Now we can start to bother black's queenside pawns. So rookie to c8, king h1, just useful prophylactic move. And now I think black makes a real inaccuracy with f6. So this takes over the g5 square, which has been a bit of a thorn in black's side this game. But now he's weakening squares like g6 and e6, and maybe the light squares in general. Okay, so white plays bishop to d1. Maybe bishop to d3 is a little bit more accurate with the tempo on the b pawn, trying to encourage black to resolve the queen side. Okay, bishop to d1. Here I think black should play c4, but alright, he played rook c to b8, bishop b2, hitting the b pawn. Black played bishop to c8, and again, if you look at black's pieces, they're creating this very strange impression. So I mean, this is all well and good if black has some kind of queenside counterplay, but if white's able to break things open on the king side, I think black is going to be rather disappointed to have so many pieces so far away from the action. Okay, so white swaps, and now rook to g1, and he's getting ready to move that knight and play g4. So black starts to head back over to the danger zone. Knight to f8, knight to e1, and now a move that looks a little bit funny. Black plays b4. Now, the strength of this move is that it alleviates the pressure that white has against the pawn when it was back on b5. But after c4, the queen side is completely closed, and so now black has this herd of pieces over there which are doing absolutely nothing. So white now has a free hand to attack on the king side, and given that black has some weak squares over there, and also fewer pieces ready for the defense, this is quite dangerous for him. So bishop to d8, now knight to d3. So another nice move. The rook was threatened on a1, and he's gaining a tempo, hitting the pawn on c5. And also, the other good point about this is that it forces black to move another piece away from the king's defense. So knight to d7, white swaps, and now here's a good place to see if you can figure out what white should do to augment the attack. So he's done a nice job of kind of closing things up on the queen side, putting a lot of his pieces on pretty good squares, but it's time to make some progress. So what should he do? So see if you can figure this out, and when you've got it, come on back and see how the game ends. Okay, so this is a critical moment, and white has a few things that he can play here. The move he played is very, very sharp, and it's probably just about as good as anything else from an objective standpoint, and from a practical standpoint, it's definitely the best move because black has to make a very serious decision, and undoubtedly in time pressure as well. So he played bishop takes h5, blasting things open there. And here Perelstein came up with didn't find the best way to play. Now g takes h5 is incredibly risky, and in fact white is just probably winning quickly with maybe knight to f5 and then g4 if nothing else, or bishop to h6. So let's see. So takes, just play knight to f5. If the queen goes to the queen side, then things are really going to be tough over there. For example, if let's say queen to a6, probably queen to e2 is going to cause some big problems, and g4 looks probably even better. So that way we're forcing the g file open. So yeah, let's promote this move. So g4 with the idea of taking, and then maybe queen to g2. And if black plays queen to a2, maybe we take, and okay, I'm not sure, maybe king, boy, black doesn't even have any good moves here. I mean, on king to h8, we have among our other fine options the move knight to d6, knight to h7, knight f7 threatened. Okay, so knight to f5, if queen to f8, bishop h6 looks pretty good, queen f7, and if nothing else, I'm sure g4 will give white many minutes of entertainment in this position. So taking the bishop, I think, is not very good. Not taking and just doing nothing is not very good. So that's what happened in the game. Black played knight h to f8 and just got destroyed. So white played bishop to g4 and followed up with h5, and he just enjoys an extra pawn and the compensation to boot. So we'll see how that ended. But first, let's take a look at the best move for black. Whoops. And it's after bishop takes h5 to play f5. So this is kind of remarkable, but it's very well intentioned. So this clears f6 for some pieces for defensive purposes. It threatens f4. It threatens bishop takes h4, and also on bishop takes g6, there's queen takes g6. So this does an awful lot, and white can maintain an advantage, but it's not fatal. So takes, and knight f5. Now black plays knight h to f6, and all of a sudden, okay, I mean black's up a piece, of course, but white is also in danger of just getting overrun by black's guys. So there's knight takes e4, that's possible. Maybe the blockading knight to g4, followed by the second knight coming to f6, and hey, black is now doing quite well. So white has to play g4. This is, not an easy move to make in time pressure for white either, giving up the pawn, and we end up with just this very, very difficult position. So of course white's amassing his forces quite nicely on the king side, but black has some possibilities. Rook to a2 for one thing could prove kind of difficult, and of course notice that white can't play g5 because queen takes h5 would really mess things up. So white's a little bit better here, and maybe deep analysis would prove that he's more than a little bit better, but he needs to be careful. Probably the best move is queen to h3, getting out of the way of the rook a2 move and also protecting h5, so that he can play g5. And I leave this again for you guys as an analysis project. All right. Well, after knight h to f8, as played in the game, there was no contest. So bishop to g4, queen e7. Again, the idea of f5. Queen takes h4. So white made a nice little timeout move with bishop to h3. And after queen h7, now h5. So taking is just strategically hopeless, but everything is bad. In the game, he played bishop to e7. And here again, let me invite you guys to see if you can figure out what white ought to do. So it's a nice position, but we still have to win it. So how do we do that? Okay, assuming you've tried to figure out the answer by now, I'll show you. The winning move is d6, with the nasty point that after bishop takes d6, white has knight takes b4. And this is just crushing. So we're threatening queen takes d6, but even more than that, we're threatening queen to d5 check, forking the king and the rook. So black's only move here is bishop to b7, but now he's down 2 pawns, and they're very good pawns too. So these outside passers are going to do all kinds of damage to black very quickly. So bishop c6, queen d6, rook a6, b4. So we're threatening to play b5, because if bishop takes b5, white has queen to d5 check, and only then does he take the bishop. Okay, so queen f7 stops that and attacks the pawn in c4. So white plays queen to d3, covers everything, and threatens b5 once again. And now c5, and we just threaten a new fork. So this is great. We get to keep pushing these pawns, and every second move is with tempo. So bishop to c8, c6, and here kind of a meaningless last move. Maybe just was so short of time that he had to move something. So queen to e7. Well, the knight's pretty close to trapped anyway. So anyway, queen to e7. Yeah, sorry, he can't move because knight to b6, just bishop takes b6. And if knight to b8, then there's bishop takes c8. So it's terrible. Queen e7, c takes d7, and here black resigned. Okay, well, so we've covered quite a lot. 3 games. The show took a little bit longer than usual, certainly, but each game was quicker than usual. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks a lot. Next week, I'll cover another one of my games, or at least a non-USCL game, back in the training videos from the Masters room. So let me know how you're liking these shows, how you like those shows. And again, if you have some ideas about the analysis in this position, in this game, or any of these 3 games, let me know about that too. So thanks a lot. Let me invite everyone to check out my blog. So I'll throw in my little ad here, chessmind.powerblogs.com. So all the stuff's free and updated daily, reports on the Amber tournament, all kinds of fun stuff. So check that out. And thanks a lot. See you next week. Bye-bye.